Alright, welcome back to the channel, everyone. I am the Fanciest Man of Cornwood, and today I've got something a little bit different for you. This is part one of a two-parter where I'm going to lay out my tier rankings for all of the commanders from Duskmourn, as well as the commander set for Duskmourn. We're going to look at the pre-con commanders, the commanders from the regular set, and just put them into different tiers of power and kind of rank them within those tiers, let you guys know my thoughts on where they fall compared to not just the other Duskmourn cards, but also just in the Commander game in general. So a quick word on kind of how I look at these tiers and how I'm going to be ranking these commanders. I'm actually going to start at the bottom. So I've got F tier on here. To me, an F tier commander is a commander that either the effect or abilities that it brings to the table just don't have an effect on the game as a whole. Either that or they have such a small effect that it's really not worth having it in that commander slot. You would be much better off running a card that provides some kind of value, even if it's a small amount of value. And then from there, as you go up the different tiers, I think that it's a holistic thing. It's obviously pretty subjective and kind of hard to objectively put these commanders into power tiers, but there's some things I look for. And the first of those is how powerful an effect or ability or both is this card providing to you during the course of the game? How repeatable is that effect, and if it is how repeatable is that effect, and if it is repeatable, how easy is it to repeat the effect? Is it something that takes a lot of setup to use and then reuse? Is it something that you can reuse repeatedly, for not many resources, for not much mana, something like that? That definitely plays into it. And then if it's not in, just immediately powerful ability that affects the board, is it an ability that provides a lot of value? And I think value is a word that gets thrown around in a lot of Magic content. I know when I was kind of coming back to the game after a hiatus and getting back into Commander, I kept hearing value thrown around, but people didn't really define it much. So I don't know if it's a perfect definition, but to me, the definition of value is something that helps you gain resources in the game. And those resources can be either cards in hand, it could be something that adds to your board presence, like additional mana, additional creatures, additional tokens for whatever purpose you need those. So to me, that's value. And I think there's cards that are just powerful because of what they do to the board, but then there's cards that are powerful because they provide so much value above and beyond what a normal card in that slot, in that commander spot, is actually going to be providing to you, kind of on average. So, and the last thing that I look at when I'm ranking them is the color identity. Some commanders are kind of held back by their color identity. They maybe are playing into a theme that's better supported in a different color or a different group of colors. Then there's other commanders that the color identity really helps them and expands what they can do. It adds different themes that they can tie into and things like that. So yeah, that's what I look at, and that's how I'll be kind of evaluating the commanders as we go. So we're going to start with Altenac the Thrice Called. This is a legendary insect beast. Costs 5 generic and 2 green. It's a 9/9 with trample. Whenever Altenac becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, draw a card. And then it also has a second ability, which is for a generic and a green and discarding Altenac, you can return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So there are, and I believe, there's been content creators in the past that have looked into this theme of having a commander in your command zone that wants to be discarded, like you want to get it into your hand and then discard it. There's some colors that are a bit better at that than others. Blue has kind of a step up because returning creatures to hand in blue is much easier than it is in pretty much any other color. There's some colorless options to do it. I think it's Command Beacon is a land that can get your commander into your hand. But, for that to be something we look at for building around, I think it needs to be a pretty powerful ability and something that we don't necessarily need to try and trigger over and over. So when I look at Altenac, I'm just looking at, a 9/9 with trample that can get you a card back if an opponent targets it. Typically, if an opponent is targeting it, it's probably going to be to remove it. So, you know, Altenac replacing himself, that is pretty nice. I mean, it's decent value in, kind of a 99 card or maybe a card in a 40 card format. I think for your commander, though, you would want something that provides more power and is repeatable. So if you could find a way in green to kind of force people to target Altenac with abilities or with spells, then that could be an interesting thing, but I think you're going to have some difficulty building that deck. So to me, Altenac is a C. The fact it's a seven cost card comes down as a 9/9 with trample, it's definitely a big body, and so it's not completely useless. It does affect the board, just having that big a body, and it's in the right color identity. It's limited to mono green, but mono green is where you're going to find the ramp. It's where you find a lot of payoffs for just having really big bodies on the board. The trample obviously helps you get through, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that you would want to run one of maybe the old style Voltron style decks with Altenac or something like that takes advantage of just the 9/9 trample aspect. But I think if you're going to go that way, there's just better options to have in the command zone. So moving on, we're going to move on to this set's version of Aminatou. This is Aminatou Veil Piercer. For one generic and a white, blue, and black Esper colors, we're going to get a legendary human wizard. And she is a 2/4. She has at the beginning of your upkeep Surveil 2. And then each enchantment card in your hand has Miracle. Its Miracle cost is equal to its mana cost reduced by 4. So Surveil is going to help us sift through our deck. It's going to help us get to things that we want and also kind of help fill our graveyard up with enchantments if we're going that route, or with creatures if we wanted to kind of go a reanimation route. The second ability, I think, though, is where Aminatou gets most of her power, and that's because these are really good colors for kind of big, splashy enchantments like Omniscience. There's enchantments that just provide really good static benefits on the board in white and black and blue. So yeah, she's in great colors for the effect that she's providing. It's really open-ended as far as building around. Blue has tons of ways to manipulate the top of your deck and kind of get those cards on top that you want. Plus, obviously, Surveil is going to help do that as well. So I think Aminatou is going to go into S tier just because the total package here of the power of her abilities, the fact that they're easy to use, there's really not much setup, if any, required other than just having enchantments in your deck, and then that the colors she has are perfect for the abilities she's bringing to the table, just really push her high up in power. So yeah, I'm going to go S tier for her. Next we've got Arabella, Abandoned Doll, for a red and a white. Got a legendary artifact creature toy. Arabella is a 1/3, and whenever she attacks, or whenever Arabella attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. I think obviously Boros is the perfect color identity for Arabella. There's tons of support for making small tokens. There's lots of equipment support if you wanted to kind of give those tokens extra abilities, maybe try and make them unblockable, or at least make Arabella unblockable, things like that. And there's a minor life gain theme that you could run here, because of course her ability is going to be gaining you life as well as kind of dealing damage to your opponents. So I think Arabella is really solid. I don't know that this is a commander that's going to just affect the board in a massive way, and even though her effect is repeatable, it's only probably going to be happening on your turn unless you can manage to give her away, donate her, maybe goad Arabella some way, something like that. But that's a lot of setup required. So she's strong. I definitely think this is an A-tier commander just because of how easy it's going to be to get those tokens and those colors. I think there's some tribal decks that she could helm that would be really interesting. Goblin decks, human decks, soldier decks, things like that. So yeah, I'm going to put her in A-tier. All right, next up we have Kion, Corrupted Memory. For 2 generic, a green and a blue, you get a legendary creature illusion. Keon is a 2/2. As long as Keon's power is even, you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. As long as Keon's power is odd, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Keon. So this is one of those examples of wizards just kind of pushing cards by adding more and more text. You know, the first two abilities alone certainly would have been enough to make Keon a really interesting build around. Simic wants to be playing things at flash speed. They obviously like playing permanents at flash speed just as much as anything else. So yeah, I don't know that she needed this, or that Keon needed this last ability of putting +1/+1 counters on, but it certainly pushes the power level up a bit. I would say this is a low A tier. It is going to require some setup. You need to be able to add counters or manipulate their power at flash speed to be able to take advantage of those first two abilities. But, you know, Simic is a color identity that can do +1/+1 counters easily. It can draw cards easily. So there's lots of ways to build the deck where you're getting benefits out of changing that power instead of just, you know, making it +1/+0 for the turn or something like that. So yeah, there's just a lot of flexibility. Keon, you don't have to build a particular theme in Simic. You know, you could go kind of Simic good stuff and things like that. And I think this is going to be a commander that just gives you a lot of freedom when you're deck building to kind of use counters to manipulate the power and use those first two abilities. But aside from that, you can kind of go whatever theme you'd like. So I'm going to put Keon in A tier. As far as Arabella or her, I think Arabella is a little bit easier to build around and maybe provides a little bit more consistency. Keon needs, you know, a lot of setup to really get the most out of those abilities, but yeah, both are good commanders. All right, let's move on to one that I'm really excited about, Kona Rescue Beastie. For 3 generic and a green, you get a legendary creature, Beast Survivor. Kona is a 4/3 with survival, which we'll see a couple of times on the list. Survival at the beginning of your second main phase. If Kona Rescue Beastie is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So the survival mechanic is going to be different for kind of each creature that has it, but there's always going to be a theme of wanting the creature to be tapped going into your second main phase. I think Kona's ability is extremely strong. Kona is in a perfect color identity for just having big splashy permanents, especially big splashy creatures to kind of dump from your hand onto the battlefield. Green has lots of ways, if those creatures happen to have high power, to benefit from that. It's got a lot of enchantments that let you draw cards when you put down big creatures and things like that. So, you know, typically this effect might be pretty limiting in just one color, but I think green is one of the colors you would want to end up in with a card like Kona. I don't think getting Kona tapped is going to be too difficult. There's vehicles, there's artifacts that will, you know, tap to add mana. There's other creatures in green that are ramp creatures that want to tap things to help add mana or something like that. So yeah, I think Kona is very strong. I don't think Kona is an S tier simply because of that kind of limited color identity, but there's certainly, you know, colorless cards that are bombs that you could slam onto the table. There's Eldrazi. There's some really powerful directions you could take this deck. So I'm going to put Kona high up in the A tier. I think with a few more colors, it could definitely be an S tier commander. All right, next up we have Marina Vendrell. This is a legendary creature, human warlock. She cost Wooburg, which is white, blue, black, red, and green, so all of the colors in her color identity. She is a 3/5, and when Marina Vendrell enters, reveal the top 7 cards of your library. Put all enchantment cards from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You can also tap her to lock or unlock a door of target room you control, activate only as a sorcery. So again, doors are something that was introduced in Duskmourn, and they are enchantments that have two different rooms you can unlock, or 2 different doors you can unlock, in each room, that each provide a benefit. And this is something that will let you kind of do that repeatedly. If you have untappers, you can do that repeatedly, but that's not where Marina's real strength is. Her real strength is just the flexibility of having all 5 colors, the fact that her ability is really easy to repeat. There's tons of flicker and blink effects that cost just 1 or 2 mana. Those effects also double as things that can protect her from board wipes and the like, if that's something you need to do. But looking at the top 7 and getting all of the enchantments from those cards, that's pretty busted. With 5 colors, you can build a deck where you're drawing, I would think at least 3 cards consistently, but really more like 4. And, the fact that, again, it's easily repeatable. If you want to include rooms in this deck, you can cherry pick the best rooms from both the Duskmourn main set and from the Commander set. I believe there's a few Commander-only rooms, so I would definitely do that. But yeah, I just think when I was talking about the tiers and how kind of the repeatability and value that you get from things can push commanders up into a tier that maybe they wouldn't have belonged to, Marina is a perfect example of that. If she revealed, say, 2 or 3 cards, then I don't think the power would be nearly as strong. But the fact that she reveals 7 cards and that you can just put all of those cards into your hand, if they happen to be enchantments, but probably at least 3 or 4 of them, and you can do that repeatedly by just blinking or using effects that will get her off the battlefield or even back into your hand. For 5 mana, yes, you need to get all the colors, but that's a ridiculously powerful ability. So I think she'll be one of the really fun build-arounds that we have in either set. And yeah, I'm excited to see what people are going to put together with her. All right, next we have Marvin, Murderous Mimic for 2 generic. This is a legendary artifact creature toy. And Marvin, Murderous Mimic has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. It's a 2/2. So this is one that my playgroup and I actually kind of messaged out to them asking for their opinion, because I was a little torn as far as whether to put Marvin as a low A tier or a high B tier. Obviously, there's tons of combo potential here. Even though Marvin is limited to that colorless identity, there's lots of artifact creatures that can set up infinite loops or something like that. And I think if you're going to run a combo deck, this is going to be a pretty easy option to just look at artifacts and decide what combos you want to look at and put together. So as far as the power level as the commander, I do think that Marvin is a B. There are combos out there. There's numerous examples of artifact creatures that can go infinite and things like that, but most of those combos are going to involve quite a few pieces. Marvin is not a commander you could just get 1 card on the battlefield and then kind of drop him and have it set up and ready to go. I think it's going to take quite a bit of work. In the 99, Marvin's going to be fantastic. He can actually, one thing that I noticed and that I think a lot of people, might have missed on their first read of him, only because it's so unusual for it not to be excluded, is that Marvin can copy mana abilities. Usually on a creature like this, that's kind of explicitly excluded, that they, can only copy abilities that are not mana abilities. But the fact that Marvin can copy those, that he can be just this extra ramp piece in the command zone, is pretty interesting. And there's definitely a lot of decks like elves or goblins like Krinko and things like that, where just having a second copy of some of those effects will be pretty busted in the 99. So yeah, I think Marvin is really good. I think he's going to be better in the 99 though than he is as a commander, and because of that color identity, I'm going to put him into that B tier. All right, moving on. Next we have Nashi, Searcher in the Dark. This is for a blue and a black. So Dimir, which is really one of the more popular color combinations in Magic and in Commander, I believe. This is a legendary creature, Rat Ninja Wizard. It's a 2/2 with Menace. Whenever Nashi, Searcher in the Dark deals combat damage to a player, you mill that many cards. You may put any number of legendary and or enchantment cards from among them into your hand. if you put no cards into your hand this way, put a +1/+1 counter on Nashi. So lots of text there, and there's a lot of things going on with this ability. Usually that would kind of push Nashi up a tier or two, at least, if all those abilities were really synergistic and working together. I do think these abilities work pretty well together, but the fact that after about turn maybe 3 or 4, you're going to probably start running out of good targets as people build their board to attack into and make that ability trigger, really kind of limits Nashi. I don't think it's an effect that's going to be repeatable, as easily as others, unless you build in a lot of support for not being able to be blocked or something like that into your deck, which that's definitely an option. But yeah, I think this is another B tier commander. It's not a bad ability. It's not an ability that you can't build around or anything like that. And actually, I find this to be more of an interesting kind of deck building challenge than some of the A tier commanders and definitely than the S tier commanders. But if we're just looking at power, I don't quite think that this ability has a lot of power behind it. And I think the total package is going to be a little underwhelming. I do like Nashi's creature types. I think that's really interesting to have all three, Rat Ninja and Wizard on the same creature. So you are going to have some options if you wanted to go in a tribal theme or, even do a few different tribes in the same deck, like Rats and Ninjas or something like that. That could definitely be an interesting direction to take Nashi. All right. Next, we've got Nico, Light of Hope. For 2 generic, a white and a blue, you get a legendary creature, Human Wizard. Nico is a 3/4, and when Nico enters, create 2 shard tokens. And these are enchantments with 2. Sacrifice this enchantment, scry 1, then draw a card. And then for 2 generic and tapping Nico, you can exile target non-legendary creature you control. Shards you control become copies of it until the beginning of the next end step. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. All right, so Nico is a really interesting package overall. There's a lot going on with this card. The fact that you get kind of 2 extra pieces for the battlefield as soon as Nico ETBs, and that the second ability is playing into the blink strategy, just like Nico benefits from themselves. I think that's just a really fun way to kind of approach a commander where you're trying to set up these loops and you're trying to get this just repeatable value from blinking over and over. The fact that, the shard tokens are enchantments, obviously there's lots of abilities in white that will look at enchantments entering the battlefield, especially now that we have the eerie triggers from this set and the creatures with those triggers, But the only thing I think that holds Nico back and kind of keeps Nico in A tier instead of S tier, which I would put her probably about here. It's a little bit less straightforward than Kona's ability. That's just the type of targets that you're going to need to put into your deck for that second ability. Obviously, you could just, put in really strong enter the battlefield abilities and just rely on kind of the blinking, and then the shard tokens could be just a bonus. But I think to get the most out of Nico, you really want things that not only have that really strong enters the battlefield ability to be able to use when they come back to the battlefield, but then also have some type of trigger that your shards can take advantage of, maybe, or some type of ability. Maybe it's an activated ability that draws cards. Maybe it's an ability that, on combat damage, something like that. But yeah, trying to find a bunch of creatures in Azorius that have both of those parts, I think, is how you unlock Nico from being just an interesting commander to one that's really got a lot of power. It's certainly not impossible, and there's a lot of creatures that are big enough to, if nothing else, just swing. You'll have a lot of flyers in Azorius that are able to get through for combat damage, and then maybe have an ETB effect on top of that, so that's always nice. But yeah, I think Nico's really good. I just think that when you're deck building, you're really going to be looking for a specific type of creature to to really get the most out of that second ability. But very strong, really fun Blink commander, and one that I'm definitely looking forward to building. All right, next let's look at Norrin Swift Survivalist. So for 1 red, this is a legendary creature, human coward. Norrin Swift Survivalist can't block. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may exile it, and you may play that card from exile this turn. Norrin is a 2/1. So the coward creature type is really interesting. I don't think it's one that you're going to be building a tribal deck around or anything like that, but it's definitely not one we see very often, and I kind of like that they've put that on a commander now, just to have it in the card pool. Not being able to block, I don't think is too big a deal for Norrin. It's a 1-drop commander that's extremely fragile, so you wouldn't be doing a lot of blocking. The second ability is certainly interesting. It's difficult to decide between an F and a C here for me. I think that second ability, maybe you could build around that. If you have a lot of small creatures with effects when they exit or enter the battlefield, then that could be an interesting way to build Norrin. Maybe something that can deal damage when it exits, or just spread around damage, or give you resources, something like that, when it exits the battlefield, and then also when it enters. That would be ideal if you could find kind of smaller creatures that do both, but that's going to be really difficult to build around. I think it's enough to save Norrin from being an F tier commander, because it is doing something. If your creatures get blocked, then at least you have some sort of options for how to build into that possibility and put your deck together. But I think definitely out of what we've looked at so far, Norrin is the weakest commander, just due to the size, due to the ability being very underwhelming. We're going to put Norrin in C tier, but I could see it being F tier. It's going to really be a deck building challenge to get the most out of Norrin. All right, next we'll look at Rendmaw, Creaking Nest, for 3 generic, a black and a green. This is a legendary artifact creature, Scarecrow. It's a 5/5 with Menace and Reach. When Rendmaw enters, and whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, each player creates a tapped 2/2 black bird creature token with flying. The tokens are goaded for the rest of the game. This is just an extremely interesting commander. The Scarecrow type is really fun. There's been a little bit of support of that over the years, so you could definitely look at maybe not a full tribal deck, but including some of those Scarecrows, because they will be artifact creatures, and that's going to trigger Rendmaw. But giving out a token to every single player, I think there's a lot of different directions you could take this card, or take this deck. And one of them is just to give them these tokens and just try and get them off the board and get benefits from that. Obviously they're goaded, so you want to watch your opponents kind of hit each other and take each other out of the game. Maybe there's ways to double the damage they're taking, or double their loss of life. Black certainly has enchantments and different abilities to do that. So yeah, I think Rendmaw is really interesting. I don't know that there's a ton of power here if you're giving away those tap 2/2s throughout the game. Eventually it's going to come down to you and one other player, and that player might then have kind of a small army to attack you with. So you can build in effects to the deck that are able to deal with that, but that's going to take up extra card slots when what you really want to be doing is maybe going for a Delirium sub-theme or something like that to take advantage of all these cards that have 2 card types on them. So I do think Rendmaw is a good commander. I think it's one that'll be really interesting to build around. I could see it being kind of a low-tier A commander if it turns out to be maybe easier than I'm anticipating to clear the board of those 2/2s after you've gotten an opponent or 2 down from all the attacking. But I think for now I'm going to put Rendmaw in B, and still look at it as a really interesting commander that would be a fun build around. All right, next we've got Rip Spawn Hunter for 2 generic, a green and a white. This is a legendary creature, human survivor. It's a 4/4 with survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if Rip Spawn Hunter is tapped, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is its power. Put any number of creature and or vehicle cards with different powers from among them into your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I think this is probably going to be my first hot take of the video, but I really think Rip is an A-tier commander. I think this is a commander that maybe isn't the most flashy, but is getting overlooked pretty heavily. Yes, it's just providing value. That ability isn't one that's impacting the board or anything like that. But being able to load your deck up with vehicles is obviously going to help feed into Rip getting that ability to work. And, green and white will have no problem putting lots of different power and toughness, creatures and vehicles into the deck. So, yeah, I think that Rip is being a little underrated for how versatile he is and just how easy it's going to be to get at least 2 or 3 cards off that trigger each turn. You already want to be running a lot of creatures in green and white. That's just kind of part of that color identity. So, yeah, being able to have it tapped isn't going to be a problem. That's, especially with vehicles, that's an easy thing to do. Ironically, Kona definitely goes in the 99 of Rip's deck, which just gives him another tool to be able to kind of get value. Cheating things into play would be obviously a big deal, but yeah, I think this is a good commander that just maybe is getting a little underrated across the board. Not flashy, but if you can get 2 or 3 cards every turn with that ability, I think you'll be happy, and then it's just going to play into creature themes, which, white and green already want to kind of run those creature-heavy themes anyway. So, yeah, just a fun card. All right, next we have the Jolly Balloon Man. For 1, a red and a white, you get a legendary creature, Human Clown, with haste. It's a 1/4, and for 1 generic and tapping Jolly Balloon Man, you can create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control, except it's a 1/1 red balloon creature in addition to its other colors and types, and it has flying and haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. Alright, now, here's a card that's not being underrated because everyone can see this card has a ton of potential. If you can do this repeatedly in a turn and you have creatures with strong enters battlefield effects or strong effects when they're sacrificed, it's just a really easy ability to use because of the cost. It's an easy ability to use because of haste, and there's no downside to building a deck around being able to just get cheap copies of really strong creatures, things like that. So the human creature type here is kind of interesting because those are both colors that have plenty of humans, lots of aggressive humans that are good to make copies of. The fact it gives haste and flying, the haste is really nice. The flying is even better because if you have creatures that kind of have effects on combat damage or something like that, that gives them evasion and at least the possibility of getting in for damage the turn that they're created. So yeah, I think this is a really fun commander. It's going to be really fun to build decks around, and that's a powerful ability to be able to do so cheaply on each of your turns. So yeah, I'm going to put Jolly Balloon Man in A, and I actually think it's a little bit stronger than Rip just because there's no limits to what you can make a copy of except that it's a creature, and that's just really, really powerful. Alright, next we have the Lord of Pain. This is for 3 generic, a black and a red. Legendary creature, Human Assassin, 5/5 with Menace. Your opponents can't gain life. And whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, choose another player. The Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. So obviously we've seen this effect before, and that effect is actually in the precon. That would be Vial Smasher. So I think this version of the effect is quite a bit more powerful. Vial Smasher, you can kind of avoid being targeted or avoid some of the board hate because you can, just point out that it's random. You're not specifically trying to attack anyone with it or ping anyone with it, anything like that. Even though you don't have that on this is going to make politicking with it much easier because you can choose where that damage is going and try to purposefully make it evened out a little bit until you're set up and ready to close people out. Shutting off life gain for a a black and red a Rakdos commander is always going to be useful. That's just one of the things that speeds up a win when you're playing Rakdos, because there's so much of that group slug, and it's an aggressive color pair that wants to be dealing damage really quickly. So yeah, I think Lord of Pain is extremely solid. I know the A tier is kind of getting bunched up, but that's because they just did a good job with these sets of kind of building in power that still takes some deck building to make the most of and things like that. The only thing that kind of tempts me to put Lord of Pain as a high B tier is that you do need your opponents to be casting big spells to get the most out of this ability. I think that's the only thing that keeps it from being kind of a low A tier. It is probably going to trigger every turn because it's whenever a player casts their first spell, not just opponents. So you will have some control over it on your turns, and if you're playing a lot of instants and sorceries, things like that. But for the most part, I think you're going to need other players to kind of help you out and help you spread that damage around. And yeah, that's a little bit harder to count on. But this might be more powerful than Vial Smasher, just because multiple players are likely going to be casting spells on any given turn, and so if you can get 2 or 3 triggers of this in the same turn, that is quite powerful. Actually, I think I've talked myself into putting that in low A tier. There's a lot of value in something that just sits on the battlefield and pings your opponents over and over again. So, all right, we're going to do one more today, then I'm going to save the rest for part 2, but our last commander we'll look at today is the Master of Keys. For X, white, blue, and black, you get a legendary enchantment creature, Horror. It's a 3/3 with flying. When the Master of Keys enters, put X +1/+1 counters on it and mill twice X cards. Each enchantment card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards from your library. So if you're not familiar with escape, this is a card mechanic that's coming back just for this commander card. It's not actually in the main set, but escape is something that thrives on you milling yourself. It's something that thrives on a lot of cards being put into your graveyard quickly. And obviously that first ability on Master of Keys is going to help make that happen. I think this is pretty powerful. The only thing that might hold it back a little is that repeating that ability could be pretty challenging. You're going to need to get Master of Keys back in your hand, most likely. And then, you'll have to feed that X value into it again. So it's a little mana intensive, but, just giving every enchantment in your graveyard escape is pretty powerful. There's lots of cards in black that will help you be able to kind of look through your library, put cards into your graveyard, and be selective with that. And then blue and black both have plenty of self-mill for you to get other cards into your graveyard to pay the escape cost. So I think this is pretty powerful. I've seen a couple of people put it into that S tier. I don't know that it's S tier for me, just because repeating the first ability is going to be difficult. The second ability is nice, but I don't know that enchantments would be my first pick for just giving everything of a card type in your graveyard escape. I think there's creatures and some others that are a little bit easier to use. But we do have some enchantments now that want to be sacrificed, like Hopeless Nightmare and, the other card from one of the Eldraine sets that kind of comes in and then wants you to be using it as a resource for sacrificing it or something like that. Those cards are going to be interesting in this deck and nice to get some repeated use out of. So yeah, strong ability, really fun to build around, and one that I think, if you can get a big couple of turns with those triggers each game, or with that enters trigger each game, then you'll be pretty happy. And yeah, just like Aminatou, those are perfect colors for an enchantment heavy deck. The only color you're really missing is green to get those enchantresses. So Yeah. So that's my thought on the first half or so of these commanders. If you are new to the channel, thanks for watching the video. Thank you for sticking around. Please feel free to comment below. I know everyone agrees with every tier list, but if you do happen to disagree, you have a different opinion on where one or more of these commanders should be, leave a comment below. Let me know, and let me know why. I'm definitely interested in hearing from all of you. Thanks for sticking around. Look for part 2. It should be out here in the next week or so. And other than that, keep playing Commander.